Welcome, everybody.
Hello. Hello.
Oh,
Hey, hey, Richard, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. We just actually got started, so welcome. Nice to see you.
Great to see you. Sorry, didn't quite know how to get in.
No, you're good. Your timing was impeccable.
Okay.
So welcome. We're all here. Great. We have not only a quorum, but we're unanimously here. So I'm Greg Topo. I'm a longtime education writer. I'm president of the EWA Board of Directors. And I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel on covering education technology in the classroom. You know, I'm going to keep my remarks really short, but I guess the thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is, you know, kind of the place we are in 2021 is, I think, a place we never expected ourselves to be, where the very means by which education is delivered is incredibly technology dependent, and you know, everyone is basically sort of in the same boat in so many ways, and I think that can have negative effects, and I think it can have positive effects. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is I've been teaching remotely undergraduate journalism, and one of the things that kind of blew me away is that my students, I have a group of about 36 students, they are all over the world, and they are collaborating pretty much as if they were in the same room, that if they were like sharing a dorm or sharing a study hall or sharing a classroom. I mean, they are amazing. I mean, it just blows me away. So I keep that in mind when I think about you know, the ways in which I think we kind of worry about the role of technology in the classroom. With, you know, when we think about how to maximize it, what are some of the problems that we are coming up against? But I think we should definitely like keep in mind that, like, if it's done well, it can really be transformative. I want to introduce our panel today. I'm actually going to just let them kind of drop in and introduce themselves. I'll just say your first name, and you kind of just jump in and just tell us who you are and where you work, and maybe, you know, a little bit about yourself. So let's start with Melissa. And make sure you unmute yourself first.
Hello, thanks for having me. My name is Melissa Collins. I teach in Memphis, Tennessee at John P. Freeman Optional School. I am a second grade teacher, and I also was a co-chair on the EdTech Genome Project, and so I was glad to be a part of their work.
Excellent. Well, actually, while we're thinking about the EdTech Genome Project, let's talk to Bart, who's Mr. EdTech Genome. Bart.
hi, everybody. It's great to see you. And by that, I mean, I can't see any of you, but I'm waving to you anyway. I'm Bart Epstein. I lead the nonprofit EdTech Genome Project, which is part of the EdTech Evidence Exchange. I'm also a research associate professor at the University of Virginia.
Excellent. Excellent, thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the Genome Project while we have you? Just like your kind of your 50-word summary.
Sure. So every other industry has shared language to be able to describe their contexts. If I asked you right now about the weather where you are and asked you to give me some numbers, you would say things about temperature, humidity, wind speed. In education, we don't know why technology performs so differently across different schools. A program that's a huge hit in Melissa's school might be a complete flop in my school.
Gotcha.
And it's the same program. So the question is, how does her environment differ from my environment? What are those contextual factors? Cultural, training, interoperability, agency, and there's a lot of possible answers.
Okay.
And about 2 years ago, we launched the EdTech Genome Project to do detailed research into understanding which factors appear to be most impactful And then we constituted a broad, diverse national steering committee, of which Melissa has been co-chairing, to review all of this research and to reach national consensus on what appear to be the 10 most important factors that explain why technology performs differently in different places. And we're releasing that report at the end of this month, and it is being built now into the actual software platform called the EdTech Evidence Exchange, through which we will collect feedback from hundreds of thousands of teachers and administrators who will report on their experiences with technology and also describe their local contexts so that people can find peers like themselves and hopefully learn from them.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Niels, let's hear from you.
Hey there, my name is Niels Patel, and I am the school leader in residence at Kairos Academies. So last year, it was our first year in operation, which was a really weird year to open up a new school, but we did really well. This year we're 6 and 7, and next year we'll be 5 through 8. My role as school leader in residence is to sit back and plan, like, how can we take this model of education we've had at the middle school and expand it out to the high school, and how can we really integrate technology, integrate these like new systems, these innovative systems across the country into a really robust, like strong high school programming.
Excellent. And remind people where you're based.
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri.
St. Louis. Excellent. Okay. And last but not least, Richard.
Thank you. I'm Richard Davidson, and I'm a neuroscientist by training. I have founded and direct the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm particularly interested in the social and emotional qualities of teachers and students that promote success and lead to optimal flourishing. And I have studied that neuroscientifically in the laboratory for many years. And more recently, we have been doing translational research out in real world contexts like schools. And we also founded a nonprofit that's associated with our center called Healthy Minds Innovations, which has as its goal to take the insights from the science and turn them into tools that can be used to measure and cultivate well-being at scale. And some of those tools obviously involve technology, and this is one area in which the work that we do intersects with the questions that are being asked.
And just so we're clear, you guys have an app, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We have an app called the Healthy Minds Program. It is available wherever you get apps. It's completely free, and it is a scientifically grounded and evidence-based app to cultivate well-being, and we've been deploying it in teachers, in public school teachers, during the time of the pandemic to help them to better cope with and be more resilient in response to the challenges that that I think most teachers have been facing during this time. And research shows that when a teacher shows up with his or her students and is embodying well-being themselves, the students actually learn better. So that's really at the core of the work that we're doing.
I think I would just from the coverage that I've done and the coverage that my colleagues have done, I would say that many teachers this past year have embodied whatever the opposite of well-being is.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say the entire time. Excellent, thank you. And before we begin, I want to say two things. Number one, we are on the record, just so if in case there's any doubt. So you may be quoted, you may be contacted by EWA members who want to hear more, want to talk more, want to kind of ask you some follow-up questions. So just want everybody, including the journalists, to be aware of that. And just for what it's worth, these sessions are almost always on the record. We just had the Secretary of Education actually earlier today, and he was on the record, which is a great luxury these days. Before we get into the conversation, I wanted to ask Melissa, and I apologize for this. Melissa, I'm very curious about this, and I haven't had a chance to ask you before now. What is the John P. Freeman Optional School, and why is it called optional? Can you give us like the short version of that?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Fascinated by this name.
Optional is almost like, are you familiar with magnet schools?
Okay.
Where gifted students are there, they're tested, they have to meet certain guidelines such as test scores,
Okay.
conduct, and grades to enter my school building.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Wonderful. So I actually want to start with the two folks here who are closest to the classroom, Niels and Melissa. So let's talk a little bit about, from your point of view, and you can decide who wants to go first. Like what are your measures of success when you see a product, when somebody wants you to try something, when a teacher in your school says we ought to buy this X, Y, or Z thing? Like, what are the questions you start asking that person, or what are the questions you start asking?
I'll jump in. So
Yeah.
I think one of the big tenets that we always want to live by is like, think big, experiment small. There are 1.5 million ed tech platforms out there, and thankfully a lot of Bart's work is around like helping us like sift through what's really good and what's helpful, but we want to experiment small. So how can we take this and do it at small scale? So we don't want to implement something huge across the entire school that's not going to work and that leads to distrust of other platforms. We want to start in a small setting and where we can really get proven data around that one small piece. And then we want to scale from there. So sorry.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, yeah. And we just want to see if, do we have evidence around its efficacy?
And when you say think big, experiment small. So when you say small, you mean like just small group of students, or like the questions you're asking, or like just very detailed? What do you mean?
Yeah, a small group of students. So we don't want to just blow up the entire school day with this new thing, right? We want to try it with a small subset of students, see if it works. Do the students like it? Are we getting the data that we want to see out of the platform itself? Do teachers like it themselves, or is it easy to operate? And if so, how can we then expand it to a larger level?
Okay, excellent.
I think too often schools try something out for everybody all at once, and then it's too big to chunk off, and then it fails, even though it could have worked in small bite-sized pieces.
Interesting. Okay, excellent. Melissa, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I agree with what he has said. But when I think about what EdTech to select, I think about functionality. A couple of questions come to my mind, meaning, is it student friendly? Is it age appropriate and safe? Does it support student learning? And I'm curious about what other educators have to say that have used that program.
But like, so I mean, we're going to talk about Bart's work in a second. I mean, but like, sort of before Bart came along and before this effort came along, like, where were you looking? Were you looking at Common Sense Media? Were you looking at like, what was your source? Who were your sources for that?
I definitely love commonsense.org. I would visit their website because they did great reviews talking about pros and cons, as well as I like the part about the reviews. And I love looking at the reviews where the teacher voice was important. I also would look at what my state department had to say, or my district, and definitely word of mouth. I would talk to other educators to see what they had to say about EdTech tools.
And let's talk a little bit about the folks at the State Department. I mean, did you feel like they were asking the right questions themselves, were on the ball?
I'm going to say, I think now they're asking the right questions, because we were forced to now that we're in this virtual space. In the beginning, I think they had some missing pieces, such as the teacher voice, and the EdTech Genome project would definitely help ensure that teacher voices are being heard.
And I wanted to ask Richard, as someone who's I guess, can I call you a developer? I mean, you really are in that space, right? Your team is in that space. One of the things that I have encountered is that people like you with a science background, a research background, a lot of times are very reluctant to get into this space because there have been so many bad actors. And they've really made lots of promises they just cannot keep. So even if you've got research behind you, even if you've got all the data in the world, a lot of people are just kind of very wary of the next big thing. Can you comment on sort of how what your team's approach has been to that?
Well, we're a mission-driven organization. I feel like we have a moral responsibility to do whatever we can to bring the insights that we've gleaned from the science out into the world in places where they can be useful. There is enough evidence now to show that the social and emotional qualities of both teachers and students make an enormous difference in the capacity of the students to flourish. And I think we need to take those data seriously and to do everything we can to help promote these kinds of strategies in education. And I certainly believe that our own approach is really, we're just at the beginning of this, and it's not, we're not so much arguing for the approach that we're implementing, but rather we're arguing for the importance of this area to take the social and emotional qualities seriously, because if we don't, I think we are at risk of dramatically compromising millions of school children who otherwise have the intellectual capability to learn, but because of social and emotional difficulties are compromised and constrained. And so the data are very clear here in showing their importance. And so I'm not at all concerned about the prior failures, and we may fail too. But I think that if we don't try, we've committed an even larger failure. And so I think that part of this is really simply bringing attention to this area and underscoring its importance, and encouraging other people to start thinking about this as well.
It's interesting because as you were talking about this, one of the things I've been thinking about is some reporting that I've done recently on, for lack of a better term, families that are school hesitant, that even though their school is either open or getting ready to open to in-person learning now this fall or this spring or next fall, they don't want any part of it for lots of reasons. But I think one of the big reasons is that there are many, many young people who, for whatever reason, have discovered a different kind of relationship to academics in the absence of having to go into school every day. The technology for whatever it brings, good or bad, has brought them the ability to have a different kind of experience. So they anyway, just something that has kind of been on my mind a lot. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Like, are we going to see in the next 6 months, a year or so, just people's relationship to school changing because they see a different way of getting what they need?
Yeah, I think that you're raising some really interesting and important issues, and I completely agree with you that the pandemic is going to catalyze a rethinking of what may be possible
Mm.
and optimal. What I would hasten to add is the importance of building in opportunities for social connection for these students who may be pursuing alternative strategies for education using technology where they may not be in as frequent physical contact with other students. But I think that the importance of social connection is really critical and should not be underestimated. And so I think that as we build platforms harnessing the power of technology in education, I think harnessing those platforms to also help build social connection will really be important.
Excellent, excellent. And by the way, I should have said this before, and I apologize for not saying it till now, but if you as a panelist want to ask another panelist a question or ask them to clarify or, you know, tell them great point or whatever, I deputize you to do that. Okay, so you do not have to just respond to me. So we can make it as big a conversation as you like. So anyway, that said, let's move on to some of the work that Bart has been doing, which is this genome project is fascinating to me, mostly because I think, you know, I've been covering education technology for at least, you know, 10, 15 years. And you're kind of scratching an itch, I think, that so many people have, which is not even just like, does it work, but like, how much does it cost? And like, you know, do we know anything about it other than that, you know, somebody decided to buy it along the way? Can you go kind of dial back a little bit, Bart, and kind of think about, and I know you've changed your background so that we don't have UVA anymore, but you know, you're at UVA and you know, you started down this road a while ago with some really interesting questions. Can you kind of take us back to talk about that?
Sure. The precursor to our current organization was actually the first EdTech accelerator that was focused on efficacy research. And we worked with growth stage education companies trying to help them do more academic research to prove that their products did what they said. And our hypothesis was that if they had evidence that their products were effective, maybe they could compete better against the big brand junk that is so popular in part because of the money and the relationships, former superintendents on the payroll. And so we paid 6 figures cash out on behalf of these companies to bring in professional researchers. And we found that having evidence that your product works is not very effective at generating higher valuations or greater sales. So in 2017, we convened the first ever EdTech Evidence, the EdTech Efficacy Research Academic Symposium, where we brought together teachers, district leaders, philanthropists, policymakers, researchers, entrepreneurs, investors, and we heard from more than 55 different presenters who talked about their relationship with evidence. And everyone agreed on 3 things. Number 1, when it comes to using technology in our schools, we should be using evidence to make decisions. Number 2, everyone agrees we're definitely not doing that now. And number 3, everyone agreed it's not their fault.
Oh, okay. And number 3 is the most important one of all, right?
Well, and this really helped bring to light the massive collective action problem that we have in our country. With approximately 14,000 school districts it doesn't make financial sense for any individual district to do research.
Sure.
But if each individual district makes an independent, economically rational decision to not do research, the next thing you know, companies are selling millions or tens of millions of dollars of products to people who have good intentions but lack the information they need to know whether they work, where they work, and what are the conditions under which they're most likely to be successful.
Is there like an analog in another industry for this? Like, is there any other industry that operates like this?
Not really, because every other industry has either very powerful free market forces, or they have a combination of regulation, litigation, and insurance that causes people to behave differently. A good example I would use is hospitals. In a hospital, for many years, there were very high mortality rates, and then families of people who died were given the ability and the frequency to sue. And as that happened, hospitals started having to buy insurance, and insurance companies play a very strong regulating function of saying, you need to have these certain job titles, you need to share these metrics, you need to learn, people need to have a certain amount of training. There's really nothing else in our country that has the same combination of fragmentation and lack of visibility that gives us this toxic and frustrating situation in which our educators are asked to choose between more than 9,000 different EdTech products without knowing which of them are likely to succeed in their schools. And most frustratingly, after everyone buys and tries things in their school, nobody has an incentive to document their work. So after you guys bring something in, you spend 6 months learning how to use it, you make some mistakes, your school's not going to pay you to document your mistakes. And we need to find ways to overcome those collective action problems. One of them is we absolutely need the federal government to play a leadership role here. Research that we put out recently shows that we're now spending between 26 and $41 billion a year on technology for our schools. And that's before the pandemic related spending. So maybe $50 billion spent this year, and we'll spend less than 1/1000% tracking what's being used and how it's performing. And that has got to change.
So we have just a couple more minutes before we're going to open it up to the to questions from the audience. So, like, Melissa, from your point of view, like, this puts a little bit of a burden on you guys. What Bart is proposing. Talk about how you see it. How you see this. I don't know if you want to call it a burden or not. Maybe these are essential questions that you've always wanted to ask. From your point of view, what does it look like?
I know that since the pandemic, I can tell you this, everyone around the world is dependent on EdTech tools. And what I realized that we had to learn why we were doing it. And so I noticed educators began to advocate what resources were out there as we function in a virtual teaching world. And so what Bart is posing is important. It is important for us to know what is out there. We need the training on how to use it. We need for EdTech tools to be sustainable. Oftentimes teachers do get frustrated with those tools and they complain, and what some districts may do, they get rid of it and then it's something else. And so it becomes a lot of issues for teachers as we continue to have one EdTech tool after another. So it does need to be some type of framework that allows us to know how to advocate for the right EdTech tools and
Mhm.
platforms to ensure that our students are successful and that those outcomes are great.
Bart, as you were talking, I was thinking like IES, they it's not long ago that they created this, the What Works Clearinghouse, to great fanfare. It's even got a great name, What Works, right? Did that not get the job done from your point of view?
More than 99% of EdTech products are absent from the What Works Clearinghouse.
Is that because they don't have a big enough budget, or they don't not looking at the right things? What's the problem?
There's two reasons. The elephant in the room that we need journalists to pay attention to is that there's hardly any efficacy research done by anybody because nobody has an incentive to pay for it. Individual school districts aren't going to do it. Individual companies generally don't do it unless and until they're so large that they have the budget and they can use it defensively. When you're an EdTech company doing $2 or $3 million of revenue per year, you'd be reckless in many cases to say, instead of spending $300,000 on sales director, social media, going to conferences, generating leads, we're going to do a 3-year-long gold standard RCT to demonstrate that our product is 23% more effective than something else, in part because it takes so long, in part because it's so expensive, in part because the customers are relatively unsophisticated and don't know how to read and interpret and use research. And they're often at risk of being sold by competitors who do fake research. They'll just hire a PhD for $5,000 to write a white paper. And all of those things lead to a lack of evidence being out there. The way the What Works Clearinghouse works is the federal government's program reviews research that is submitted. So it's a bit misleading. There's no such thing as a product in the What Works Clearinghouse. There are research studies that are analyzed and are found to have met the research standards.
Okay.
So if I did a research study of Richard's program and it was a high quality, robust study, I could submit that to the What Works Clearinghouse. And if it was accepted, then someone going into the What Works Clearinghouse could find a paper that is describing Richard's program. But even then, what we hear from educators is having a single study of a product that worked in one place, maybe under ideal circumstances, is really of very little value to people in other states with different demographics, different contexts, different teacher agency, interoperability, training support, and all those other factors. So I don't mean to talk badly about the What Works Clearinghouse. It's just, it's time to expand the scope of the What Works Clearinghouse by 3 orders of magnitude so that we can study every product that's on the market that has any significant penetration.
And I guess Mark Schneider ought to know about that. So basically what you're asking is the What Works Clearinghouse needs to sort of ask different kinds of questions, needs to undertake different kinds of queries, not just reviewing research, but asking about the actual, the efficacy of the products themselves. One of the things I want to ask Niels about the work that you're doing, quite often, journalists will see something happening, see something working at a school, and I mean, if you don't know it already, the thing that journalists kind of hate more than anything else is to be sort of made a fool of. So they'll do what they can to like find the thing that like isn't working right? Find the fly in the ointment, right? Find the you know, something that's broken. And like, what would you say to a journalist who sort of is asking these kinds of questions? You like, you know, you're using technology and you're not getting results. Should they be asking like different kinds of questions? Should they be thinking about it differently? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the very first thing is like, who are you talking to in this situation, right? Are you talking to somebody that's going to sell and make everything look beautiful and pretty? Or are we talking to the people who are on the ground? Are we talking to the teachers who are implementing that platform is the most important thing. They're the ones that have the most information, the most data, and they can tell you, is it working or is it not working? So they can give you the most clear picture. If we're talking to people only that exist at a district level, there's several layers removed from the actual implementation of it. So I think a lot of it's like, who are we talking to first is super important. And the next is asking like proof, right? Anecdotal evidence, also like actual numbers, like how do teachers know it's working? What is the district providing them training around? And then how are they following up with it? And how are they consistently looking at that data to see how do we implement this? And then how can we continue to better implement it? And if it doesn't work, not like laying into it and like doubling, tripling down what districts often do and spending money just because they bought in the first place. Let's move on and let's figure out what we can do better and how can we pivot to another thing that's going to help our teachers more.
Yeah. You know, you said earlier something that I hadn't heard before, is this idea of think big and experiment small.
Sure.
I mean, it strikes me that you can have a lot of little failures, but also a lot of little successes. And I guess I wonder, like, you know, sort of thinking about what Bart has been kind of the way Bart has been thinking. How do you decide like what should go to the next stage? How do you decide to sort of make something bigger at school level?
Yeah, I think again, it always goes back to the teacher, always goes back to the person that's implementing it. The first question is, how did this help your classroom specifically?
Okay.
How did you use it? And how can we use it better to like see the success that you saw? And then what can we do to make it to the next level? Is it only working in your specific context because you do a certain thing? Or does this work within the larger context of the school?
Okay.
So just because it is successful in the classroom doesn't mean it's successful in the district, or it doesn't mean successful in another classroom, which is exactly what Bart is talking about with the EdTech Genome Project, right? Is looking at context specific and to figure out like what will work, what is transferable, and what is only going to work in this specific level or the specific context.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, we have a couple more minutes. If you haven't already and you're listening in, you can drop a question in the chat. I think that's probably the easiest way.
Greg, we have our first question
okay.
from Caroline Hendry of EWA.
Yeah, go ahead.
Caroline was asking for the panelists, are you aware of ongoing high quality research of the efficacy of the multitude of ed tech products that have been deployed during the pandemic?
Okay. Starting with Zoom, right?
So we don't have time to get into it here, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to follow up. The process of doing research is very, very slow. Okay. There are very few funders of research in the country. And if you want to study something, you have to apply to IES or NSF or one of the handful of foundations that does this type of research. And it takes months and sometimes years for them to come up with and articulate a research question and to put out an RFA and to assemble a panel of reviewers. IES is working very hard to stand up research competitions right now. There's a transformative research RFA on the street for which they just received, I think, over 140 applications. But those applications are for research that starts in the future. So the best we can hope for now is that some researchers will be able to retrospectively look at the data that we've collected and they ask educators about their experiences to try to understand how these different experiences have impacted student performance. But education research is fantastically complicated for all these contextual reasons that we discussed. And the same technology program in Melissa's school and in Richard's school may perform very differently for factors that are well outside the scope of that technology. And we are not yet to the point where there's much research at all of that type being done. So the short answer to your question is, I expect we'll see some well-intentioned, self-serving research coming from companies who have seen their products explode in usage, along with anecdotes, but very little concrete proof of causation of any type.
I was just going to ask the panel for anecdotes about technology they've used in the past year that has impressed them at any level. Has anybody got anything they've really gotten excited about or really interested in, or even just kind of, thought this has a lot of potential?
I can just jump right in. So this was even before the pandemic. We've been using the Summit Learning curriculum, which is very vast, but I love just putting everything online, right? We can get rid of these expensive textbooks. There's so much curriculum out there, and how can we use it? How can we learn from one another? Can we create this large community, which the learning platform has done to share those best practices across it? So that's been extremely helpful. And then also their move towards grading based on cognitive skills. So not necessarily only content grading, not did you memorize this date, but how are you able to select evidence from a paragraph? How are your comprehension skills? How are these softer skills that aren't really measured that frequently? And then helping us look at those skills as opposed to just fact memorization. So the entire platform itself has been really helpful in creating that type of style of grading and learning at our school.
Nice. And is that something that the pandemic has kind of shined a light on, or is that or is it just sort of carried on as if nothing ever happened?
Yeah, no, it absolutely has. I think our students were well positioned to actually switch to completely virtual. We did it within 48 hours, in large part because every student came with a personalized Chromebook. They all had a one-to-one coach that was their direct family contact that they were talking to every single day. And their entire curriculum, they were already able to navigate it online because they had practiced it the entire year before. So that switch was able to happen almost seamlessly.
Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in with their thoughts on that? Well, go ahead, Melissa.
No, Noelle had a very different experience from what I had in Memphis. We realized just because a kid had access to a device did not mean that they had the skill set or support to use a device for learning. And so some kids had parent support while others did not. And what I really realized is that I needed the families and caretakers in order to survive. In my district, the kids did not have devices in their hands. And so they had to quickly use those funds to purchase devices for those students.
Gotcha. We actually, now that we're almost at time, I hope you guys can stick around for 5 more minutes because we all of a sudden got 2 questions. Thomas, let's do a lightning round.
So another question from Caroline for Melissa. Do you think teachers will feel burned out with classroom EdTech as we emerge from the pandemic, or do you think they will be much more comfortable with it and become more confident users?
Wow. So I want to say at first we really felt burned out because we had to learn why we were doing, and then it was so much. But I can say that we do see the hope with EdTech tools, and teachers are now feeling more comfortable because they had the opportunity to research and locate the appropriate EdTech tools and platforms to ensure students' academic success.
Excellent. One more question.
Great. And so we have a question from, I believe it's Pia. How are schools evaluating EdTech products with regard to cybersecurity and related issue? Is there a concern that as EdTech products proliferate, students become more vulnerable to privacy violations?
I would say the short answer is yes, but somebody else should jump in.
I could jump in there and say that this is an issue that's becoming more and more prominent. Organizations like COSIN and the Future of Privacy Forum are trying to be proactive to help people protect student data. It's very, very important. It's getting increased attention. And I also wanted to just comment on Melissa's last point about teachers and EdTech. We did research where we asked teachers, how do they feel about returning to the classroom and using technology? And they told us that they sense an unprecedented need for differentiated instruction because their students are all over the map for the reasons that Melissa focused on of unequal home environments. And they need and expect EdTech to help differentiate that instruction as it never has before. And so there's a lot of optimism that technology, when used right and supported properly, can help teachers reach more students.
Great. We could keep talking about this, and I know there's plenty of other things to talk about. We need to be sensitive to the time. Folks have other sessions to go to, but I want to thank everybody on this panel for thinking about this stuff, thinking differently about this stuff, certainly. You should, if you are an attendee, you should have a way to reach every one of these folks for follow-up questions. That's in the chat. And obviously, please lean on these folks with your good questions. I think we're at time. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your great ideas.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Thank you
Yes.
guys so much. So real quick, before we all go, I just wanted to thank the panelists. Thank you, Greg, as well. You'll get an email next week, attendees, that will include an evaluation form. We really would love for you to complete that, as it really helps us plan our next event and events in the future. And what's coming up next, we have a short break for 30 minutes, and then we have 3 sessions, one on partisanship and where the different sides agree and disagree on education, a session including new research from the Aspen Institute, and finally, what reporters need to know about state testing in 2021. So take a short break, and everyone please come back. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.
See you soon.